Back in the dark, ancient years where dragons ruled of 2012, Steam Greenlight was where Zomboid first found its footing, and it's still yet to be released almost 15 years later, meaning that it's outlived the service that put it on the map nearly 3 times over. Both in gameplay and in development, Zomboid feels incredibly directionless and absorbed by their scope that has ballooned so dramatically from where they began, like a Joseph Anderson video. I don't think it's a game that necessarily needs introduction, really. Zomboid is a zombie apocalypse sim set in rural Kentucky where your main enemy is boredom. The developers, Indie Stone, feel like they prioritize in a way that is paradoxically both laser-focused and also completely random. Project Zomboid patches feel much more like whatever the developer felt like changing rather than changes that lead to a cohesive goal. This is hard to convey, so stay with me here. Patches for another sandbox game, a little indie hit you might have heard of, called Minecraft, have one main goal stated right there in their title. This one is about world gen, this one is about the nether, this one is about villagers. All of the changes in these patches are centered around that one thing. They have a thesis, essentially, and everything in the patch is in support of their thesis. A Project Zomboid patch has no such focus. They just come out, and it's a mountain of changes that are largely unrelated and honestly mostly irrelevant. Build 42 released with animals, redone aiming, a new vision cone, taller buildings, a larger map, and just all this crap. Every single one of these could have been its own patch where community feedback could have been focused around it, instead of a monolithic update which bricks the entire modding scene. One of the newly touted features was a completely overhauled crafting system. They saw the rise of the 10 years later mods and wanted to support them with a better and more fleshed out system. They spent a lot of time on this, and that too feels so wasteful because it affects such a small minority of their player base. They spent at least over a year working on these systems that hardly any of their players are going to interact with, instead of focusing on a more comprehensive overhaul of something more universal like, say, stealth, which, by the way, is completely broken. The result of their, how do I put this, laser-focused and random. It's disco ball development. The result of their disco ball development is that sometimes you will click a button, get jump scared by a massive screen with everything listed in great detail, and then barely be able to actually click on any of the elements because their UI is still based on what they built over a decade ago. Usually when you start a project that requires millions of dollars of investment, you start with a design document. It'll list, this is what we're making, these are the features we want to include, this is how we plan to do that. During development you will end up changing and iterating on details, like game balance, but the whole thing should stay roughly in place. You set a deadline based on how long you think it'll take to finish, and you stick to it until it's done. I'm not convinced Project Zomboid has one of these, or if it does, it gets bigger every day. It's important to add this disclaimer to what I'm saying in this video, now that you're here and invested and theoretically not going to click off immediately. I have around 250 hours in Zomboid. I've made a video on it before, actually, and I really have enjoyed my time with it in general, but they really could have wrapped it up years ago, instead of committing to continue to overhaul every system. See, Indie Stone might as well be in an arms race now with itself over whether or not to prioritize realism or fun. They have all of these incredibly overcomplicated systems in service of, well, nothing, really? They're just there to be there. They've bothered to simulate individual temperature insulation values for every piece of your body, but none of that matters. How could it? Throw on a couple pieces of clothing until the cold debuff goes away. A simple max acceptable temperature value like RimWorld would have served the exact same purpose and freed up so much dev time. There's an entire car mechanics screen where every piece of every vehicle is meticulously tracked, but interacting with this is pretty much a waste of time because the game is set in America, and taking a visit to your local parking lot with your handy-dandy industrial-sized lockpick will almost certainly net you a new vehicle. They've bothered to simulate diet. Just why? They haven't made very good use of the setting, unfortunately. Despite being set in America, their implementation of firearms just sucks. The game is set in the firearm capital of the world with at least one gun in every other house, not a made-up statistic by the way. This was the perfect excuse to have a really in-depth weapon customization system akin to, say, Tarkov, and even if the buffs were minor at best, they're weapons, so you still get to feel like you're improving your arsenal, which gives you a long-term goal to play with. Instead, there are somehow almost no long-term goals whatsoever, but I'll get to that later. Fixing the firearm situation has instead fallen onto modders. Beta 42, released in beta? Recently, after a 3-year dev cycle. Prior to this build, there were 3 guns in the entire game. Not kidding, by the way. There's more now, thankfully, but there's still no customization, and they're inexplicably rare. The aiming system that they've remade also blows, being subjectively worse than a modded implementation of the same system. The developers have found themselves outmatched by modders almost universally, in my opinion, and honestly, it's not that surprising. It's hard to understand from an outsider's point of view, but working on something this complicated with a history as long as Project Zomboid means touching literally any of it is liable to break a few dozen mods at least, and at worst a few thousand mods. I have no doubt in my mind that they put off overhauling guns for so long because Britta's weapon pack is the most endorsed Steam Workshop mod, and for good reason. The developers even touching that system, never mind completely overhauling it, means putting strain on those modders and also guarantees that both the Indie Stone and those modders will receive unjust hate from people who don't understand why their favorite mod doesn't work anymore. Let's say Build 41 was the last one. No more Project Zomboid after that. The last 3 years could have been spent on something entirely new. Let modders have their field day with the base that you laid down and move on to greener pastures. Had this happened with Build 40, they would have had, as of now, a spare 6.5 years to make a new game. Instead, 3 years pass in between builds, and the release of Build 42 is physically incapable of delivering to the expectation of a patch in development for 3 years. Consumer standards are definitely warped due to what the AAA studios can produce in 3 years. Like, there's Sekiro, God of War Ragnarok, the COD reboot, Jedi Survivor, and Hades for a few, whereas the Indie Stone is, well, I mean, they're indie, it's in the name. Regardless of that, after 3 years, they unleashed their monstrous patch containing a different crafting screen, some animals, fish, there's some crops, and also the map is a little bit bigger. I honestly can't remember anything else. Credit where credit is due. The introduction of animals is a pretty impressive step, but tell me, how many players do you think are actually going to interact with this system? Are you going to really go into a zombie survival sim like, oh yeah, I just can't wait to be a farmer? It does not help Indie Stone's case that they are being so dramatically outpaced by modders that it's comedic. Practically immediately after Build 42 came out, a mod called Week 1 was released that is doing its best to simulate the system that the devs have been teasing for years, which are human NPCs. The mod is clunky and it's clearly buggy, but I'll give it this. It's actually playable, and it does work. Modders are willing to take shortcuts to make systems happen in a reasonable time frame, instead of going out of their way to do what the Indie Stone have said on multiple occasions that they plan to do with this system, which is to simulate the lives of each and every NPC. Doing that is actually insane, and not really in a good way. Sure, it's the best way to make it accurate, but almost nothing is gained from doing it in such a detailed way, and it takes 50 times longer to make. I guess that does track with how they've made the rest of the game, though. I don't really care about the fabled Build 43, which will contain those promised NPCs, because it'll probably come out half a decade from now. Week 1 is clearly amateurish, but I don't care, because I can actually play it. It is baffling to me that for Build 42, the current patch with the crafting overhaul and the animals, Indie Stone have gone out of their way to delay it so massively so they can include and polish systems that incentivize the most dull way possible of playing the game, where you'll just be fast-tracking yourself to realizing that there's no challenge, and quitting out of boredom. It's even more baffling because there are systems which are far more core to everyone's experience that are completely non-functional, like stealth. See Retinara's videos on it if you don't believe me. Implementing a proper stealth system would go a long way to enhance the experience for everyone, but instead, cows were the big focus. I'm from Wisconsin. They're not that special. A large focus of this new update was on crafting and blacksmithing, but I can't imagine very many people are going to engage with this. It is impressive, sure, but when you can practically stumble over a decent enough weapon by walking in any direction, spending 20 hours enslaving yourself through the unintuitive interface to go through the motions of being able to just figure out how to forge one, is a hard sell, especially when the blade that you end up with is only marginally better than something you can find embedded in a zombie. The main casualty of designing in such a systems-heavy way, as Indie Stone have done, is that there are no goals outside of interacting with the systems. Immersive sims are systems heavy by nature, but those systems tend to be in the service of something. Most of them, like Deus Ex or Dishonored, are linear story-based games. Zomboid is a sandbox game, and so in place of using all the different game's mechanics to progress the story, you use them to... I don't know. There absolutely could be rewards to chase. The game is set in rural Kentucky, the perfect place to come across enough God-blessed American firepower to bring democracy back to the voteless. Instead, the player is really only on their journey of unimaginable grind. Zomboid is intentionally designed to be unbelievably grindy in almost every area, and I get the point of this. Skills take a long time to level up because becoming a master at a certain task does in fact take forever. You're intended to level up your skills slowly over a very long time, which is fine in theory, but brings back up the problem of there just not really being enough stuff to do. You're not grinding on Zomboid's endgame in service to, say, craft an antenna to look for survivors, or to fix up a helicopter, or to slice your way out of the exclusion zone. You're grinding for the sake of making the number go up on your stats sheet. What makes this all the more frustrating is that Zomboid is already poised to have a perfectly fitting ending that solves all the problems that I've brought up. Zomboid establishes without really any doubt, through a few radio and TV broadcasts, that the world is completely doomed. The infection spreads worldwide and consumes all life. So, picture this. You've been surviving for a few weeks to months in the desolate aftermath by yourself. You become quite the efficient hunter of the undead, and having done your fair share of scavenging, you've grown your skill portfolio quite extensively. As you're out looking for another gun store, you come across a rather nondescript, decrepit old building which is surprisingly hard to get into. The door has a keycard slot, and you happen to cross a random one a while back. After fumbling through your car's trunk, you dig it out of the pile and put it to the slot in the door. The door to a nuclear missile silo. Inside are secrets to find about where the Nox virus came from, alongside with its cure. Total, mutual destruction. It is now your choice to continue pointlessly living, or to press the button that'll end the infection for good. You better do it before it's too late. It's not a stretch that there'd be one out here in the middle of nowhere, and getting into it could require a mix of high-level skills and information from all across Kentucky to both get the silo operational and fire off its payload. Maybe you need to get the electrical grid up and running again, and perhaps the place's launch codes are scattered throughout the world, either completely randomly or at a select few places. Finding those things prematurely would serve as the lure to find this silo in the first place. With this, there's a clear goal to progression, and none of the game's themes are compromised. You either choose between pointlessly living for the sake of it, or total destruction. Once NPCs are added sometime in the next century, there's a whole extra layer of tragedy if you have other survivors with you. Do you doom not only yourself, but them, in the vague hope that it will wipe out the Nox virus? Would you do it? Could you? As for me, well, it's a hard choice. Maybe there's still someone out there. I should see what I still can outside of the exclusion zone before condemning the world, right? Thanks to my patrons, Emmy and Potato especially. Like, comment, subscribe, you know the drill by now, and use your turn indicators when driving. Also drive on the speed limit.